Hello, welcome to my session. My name is Keisuke Miyako, and today I'm going to talk about emails. Now here's the agenda. The presentation has basically got 4 parts. In the first section, I'm going to briefly talk about the difference between the 2 commands for the Internet Commands plugin, the send command and the QuickSend command. And maybe, I don't know, you might assume that the QuickSend command is more like a command for beginners or just to get started, and for more advanced usages or more complicated stuff, the send command is the preferred one. Maybe I might challenge that assumption. In the second part, we're going to talk about security, or more specifically, 4 different schemes that are implemented, or well, that you can actually handle for the Internet commands. And by the way, throughout this session, I'm going to use a consistent color code system. So every time I talk about something related to the send command, it's going to be the light blue color, QuickSend with the darker blue. So 4 different security measures. Then, in the third part, I'll be talking about MIME, which is the specification underlying the whole email protocol, and how understanding MIME could help you deal with situations where you would not be able to cope with otherwise. And in the 4th and final section, I'll be talking about OAuth, which is an open specification, and specifically in relation to how you could use this to send emails through Gmail. So part 1, send or QuickSend. You probably know this from the documentation already, but to use the send command, you basically construct your email procedurally. So there's a new command, and you end with a clear command. And in between, you set the port, you define the host, and so on. Now, in a real-world application, you'll probably have some extra code to handle with exceptions, errors, or logging. But basically, at the most simplest form, even, you have to use at least 8 lines just to send an email using the SMTP suite of commands. Compare that with the QuickSend command. The name suggests it, but you can send a command quickly with 1 line. Basically, the mail will arrive in the same time, but the point is that the development is going to be quick and simple. The thing is, the QuickSend command has been enhanced over the years. Now let's quickly review the evolution of this command. So that was the command signature back in 4D version 2004, or I should say up until 2004. Then, in V12.1, encryption, SSL, was added to this command. So now you could send email via SSL using this command. So that's nice. Notice the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th parameter, use SSL. Actually, it should have a $sign, but anyway. So that extra argument was added in order to support SSL. Now that was 12.1. Then another enhancement, which was authentication. Notice now, since version 13.2, we have the ability to specify the username and the password when sending an email with this command. Notice also that the use SSL parameter you just saw on the previous slide has been renamed with a more generic name, params. That was because in v14, this argument was extended to not just simply specify whether you're going to use SSL or not, but more. Passing 1 would mean you use SSL. In previous versions, or version 13, I should say, 0 meant you don't use SSL, 1 meant you do use SSL. Now, that was changed in v14. Now, 1 means you use SSL, that's unchanged, but 0 now means that you can switch over to SSL if the server requires SSL. So there's a difference. It no longer means don't use SSL. That value has been shifted to, it's not on the slide, but number 2. So now, since version 14, 1 means use SSL, 2 means don't use SSL, 0 means let the server decide. Other than that, there's another possibility, which is to pass the number 4, which means that the body of the email is actually HTML. And you can combine these values. So 1 plus 4, which is 5, means that the body is HTML, and you're going to send it over SSL. So that was a major change in version 14. Then, in R5 of version 14, there came the ability to tell the plugin that the body, or actually not just the body, but mainly the body, is raw MIME. Now, I'm going to expand on that later in the MIME section, the third section. But really, for me, and hopefully by the end of this session, you would agree that this is really a killer feature which makes the QuickSend command so valuable in version 15. Because now we're past R5 and we're now talking about v15. Again, the options can be combined. So 8 on its own means the body is MIME, but you can also combine that with the SSL option as well. So here, that was a quick review of the evolution of the QuickSend command. And let's take a look at the demonstration. Now, I'm going to use a 64-bit version of 15R. But the same command, the same method, I should say, will work in a plain vanilla v15. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to use the standard procedure to send an email using 4D internet commands. I have 2 possibilities. One is to use what is called a start TLS. I'll talk about that later. And the other is to use SMTP over SSL. Notice the difference. To use start TLS, I'm going to use the port number is going to be 587. SMTP, the port number is 465. Both methods do use SSL, but there's a different convention involved. And this is just to prove the point that for the internet commands is capable of handling both situations. So in the first instance, I'm going to just go for the first option. And perhaps I should, actually I'm going to put a breakpoint here because this is interesting. So the body of my email is actually an HTML sample text. And notice how I'm constructing this email using process4d tags. The template is actually in the resources folder, and I'm going to show it to you using the lovely Atom editor. I'm not sure, like several years ago, Sublime Text or TextMate, or some kind of rich text editor for developers. There were some very popular editors, but this editor, which was developed by GitHub and it's open source, it's free to download, is increasingly gaining popularity. It's available for Mac OS, Windows, and also Linux. And part of the reason for its popularity is how you can extend the editor so easily. Here, actually, I used the same editor during the keynote presentation, but I didn't specifically mention that I was using the Atom editor. But you can see that how the 4D commands are nicely tokenized inside, well, I'm not using 4D code, within the context of a 4D tag. That is because I have told this editor, I have customized it to recognize a specific language, which I would call 4D tag. Normally, in plain text, it will be much like this. Or even if I would have told the editor that the text is HTML, the text inside 4D tags will be just gray because from an HTML point of view, it's just comments. And the customization is done this way. You go to Preferences, and you look for a package, or install actually, and then you can search for a package. And this one, language 4D tag, is the one that I wrote and I submitted to the Atom website. So you can, within the editor, look for this package, language 4D tag, and then with a click of a button, extend the editor to recognize 4D tags. And this is very useful if you're going to edit an HTML file or any file, including 4D tags. So that was the template, and now we have a body, and I'm going to send. Now this is a scary bit, error 0. Fine. That means there's no error, and the email was sent. And I should receive it in my email client shortly. Oh, there it is. So that's the email. It's HTML, it's got an embedded image, and it's HTML. So that was sending an email using 4D internet commands. But of course, that's not the point of this presentation. We go deeper. In that example, I used SMTP send. I could have replaced it with SMTP QuickSend because it now supports HTML and SSL and everything. This table does a quick comparison of what is possible with the send command as opposed to the QuickSend command. And as you would expect, all features are pretty much supported by the send commands, whereas the QuickSend commands does a good job, but some features like what? Adding a custom header, adding an attachment, or things like that are not supported with QuickSend. So you might think, oh, it's less powerful. But the crucial point is the last line. Since v14R5, we have the ability to send a MIME directly, and that is only possible using the QuickSend command, and that changes everything. Because of this, it really covers for all the missing parts, like adding a custom header, adding an attachment. That really doesn't matter, because if you can send MIME directly, then you can do all those things and more. And that's really the main message I want to get out through this presentation. QuickSend is actually the more advanced option. So send versus QuickSend, I will say QuickSend. Now, switching topics, security measures. When email first came into existence, it was mainly used between academics trying to exchange information across the world. There was no authentication, there was no encryption. It was just an open world, and it was a naive world, you could say. But then, as emails got popular, there was an increasing need to control or protect against misusages of the technology. And first, because sending email, by definition, had no way of controlling who's sending to whom, it was actually the first thing that people did was to use POP3, which is actually a technology for receiving email, to authenticate sending email. So what you would do is you would first use POP3 login. This is for the Internet Commands command to authenticate yourself. You identify yourself with your username and password, and then quickly log out. Or you could receive emails if you want to. But the point is, you first identify yourself. Then that information is remembered by the mail server, and sending emails shortly thereafter would be, it would be allowed. The server remembers the username and the password and the IP address. So as long as you use the send command within a reasonable threshold, then that was assumed to be a legitimate operation. So that's how POP before SMTP used to work. And to do that, you use the POP3 command. Then came real authentication in SMTP, sending email. And so you actually identify yourself with a username and a password to the server when you send an email. And to do that, in 4G, you would use the SMTP AUTH command. So you supply the username and the password, and then the server will send the email through. What's interesting with this technology is that it's often used combined with what is called a submission port. So traditionally, emails were sent through port number 25. But then to block unauthorized usage of port number 25, most servers by this time, this is around 2004, year 2004, I could say, servers started blocking outbound port 25, and then instead what the clients were required to do was to first submit their email request to another port, typically 587, and identify themselves, and then the server would send an email. So you would actually, in addition to the auth command, you would also have to use the set port command in 4D. And that means that you could only send email using the send command at this point. But as I mentioned earlier, QuickSend was extended to handle authentication. So now you could use the command as well, even if the server required name and password authentication. And then there's SSL. So here, now that servers can identify the client, there was another need, which was to secure the privacy of the actual message content, because initially, emails were just plain text, and anybody could just capture the TCP packet and see what's inside. The first thing that came was to just do the whole email thing over SSL encryption. That's called SMTP over SSL. The basic protocol is the same, SMTP. It's just that the communication is done over SSL. And in 4D, that was support for that was added in v12.1, which meant that you could send an email over SSL. To do that, you would typically use the set port command to tell that you want to submit the email through, normally it's a different port, 465, and then use encryption. In version 12, you could only use the send command, but then shortly thereafter, SSL support was added to QuickSend, so you can use either command. Normally, the two technologies are used together. So you use AUTH for authentication, and you use SMTP over SSL for encryption. Either way, you can use for the internet commands quick or not quick to handle these challenges. One thing is Google. When you try to send an email using for the internet commands, over SSL, so you are using SSL, you are authenticating the user, you would still fail. And the reason for that would be this. So Google, the screen capture is a little bit small, so I'll read it out, would tell the user, so the user is logged in as a Google user, on the browser says, some apps and devices use less secure sign-in technology, which makes your accounts more vulnerable. So it's kind of concerning for the user. It says you can turn off access for these apps, in other words, block that application from sending an email on your behalf, which we recommend, or turn on access if you want to use them despite the risks. So it's kind of saying, we don't recommend it, so what's the point? Using encryption, you're using username and password, so you think that you've done all the right things. The reason why Google still calls it, vulnerable or risky, is that a user could just steal somebody with bad intentions could steal that username and password, and then they can just disguise themselves as the real user. What Google is proposing is something called OAuth, where in addition to the username and the password, and obviously the use of SSL, you would also use a third line of, or third leg, they call it, security, which is that it could be another email address, or it could be a device that you have to notify that somebody has logged into Google, and just wanted to tell you that if you're aware of it or not. And that's done through a technology called OAuth. So OAuth, we're going to talk about it in the fourth section, but unless you use OAuth or the user consents through this screen to allow for the internet commands to send an email on their behalf, it's going to be blocked. Start TLS. So this is another way of using the SSL encryption technology to send email. Whereas the previous one was doing the entire communication between the client and the server through SSL, the way this works is that first the client, or 4D, for the internet commands in our case, connects to the server and says, I want to send an email. Then the server says, oh, in that case, perhaps we should go to a closed room and then have the conversation privately. Switch over to SSL. And that's how it works. This type of SSL was supported in 4D since addition for this was added in v13.2 for both the send and QuickSend commands, so you can use either. So here's the summary. Put before SMTP, you could have done it in any version, even 2004. You just have to log in, log out, and then send an email. AUTH, that's the one where you supply the username and password. That was only possible with the send command, but then support was added to the QuickSend command in version 13, so now you can use either. SSL, send got support for this in 12, but now it's possible with QuickSend as well. And Start TLS, actually the support was added at the same time. So again, use QuickSend. Why not? Now let's talk about MIME. What is MIME? Well, in its early days, an email was very simple. It was just plain text. The format had some headers, header name, value, 2 empty lines, and there was the body in plain text. It was similar to HTTP, and that was good. Then there was a need to support characters other than ASCII, so there's a problem because an email uses only 7 bits, but any most extended character codes need the 8th bit, so they had to work around this limitation that the server only works on 7 bits, but somehow you want to send an email that uses the 8th bit. And that problem was coped with the MIME. Another reason why MIME was created was that there was an increasing need to add attachments. And obviously, you can't have attachments as a binary file, so it could contain control characters. It could obviously contain the 8th bit, and it could be messy. You might have not really thought about this because for the internet commands, the plugin handles MIME internally. Actually, all the commands, SMTP, body, header, to, from, was actually what it was doing. It was creating the MIME in memory prior to the send command. So perhaps you wouldn't have had to deal with it. So the good side is that it's all done automatically in the plugin, but the downside is that you have little control. So character sets. You use the set pref command for the internet commands to specify which non-ASCII character you want to use in your email. Typically, I suppose in this region, it will be the Windows 1 to 52 code page. That's the number of the code page, or the Western European encoding. 4D supports Unicode since version 11, but the thing is, the plugin was late to come to the game. UTF-8 or Unicode support was only fully implemented in version 14, and not even in the first dot releases of version 14. What happened, well, UTF-8 as an option did exist since version 11, but what 4D Internet Commands was actually doing was it took your Unicode text, it converted it internally to Mac Roman or whatever, depending on the system preferences, and then converted it back to UTF-8. So any character that could not be represented in that intermediary encoding was lost. It's only since version 14 that the Unicode is fully preserved in the email. Anyway, that's done. Attachments. So there are various encodings, there are various ways to encode a binary file so that it will fit in the limitation of SMTP, which is plain text and 7 bits. 4D Internet Commands supports all these different encodings, but really, you only need to know about base 64. The other formats, like Apple single, Apple double, were really ways to support the good old resource fork idea in Mac OS 9. Nowadays, even Apple, even the mail application on an iOS device do not support these encodings. So there's no reason to not be using base 64. So those issues are pretty straightforward. There was a small addition in 14R4, so 15 really, which is that you can now specify the content type of an attachment. So previously, for the internet command would always use the content type application octet string, which means a generic binary file. So the email client may or may not open the file or let the user open a file using a proper application. Now you can specify the MIME type, that is a PDF or it's an image or whatever, to give a better user experience. And there's a list of all the extensions that will be recognized by the plugin. But obviously it doesn't cover all the known file extensions in the world. For example, docx, that's the current form used by Microsoft Word, it won't be converted to a MIME type, which means that 4D will fall back to application octet string, which may or may not be a good thing. Probably not a good thing, actually. Something else that was added in R4 is that you can give a content ID to your attachment, which is useful when you want to send an HTML email containing embedded images. So instead of having a hyperlink that will that will let the client, the email application, to fetch that email over the network, the image is all packaged in the email body, and the image will appear embedded in the message, which is actually what I did in the first demonstration. Again, these are not reserved to, they're not exclusive to the send command. You can use all of these technologies using the QuickSend command. So what is the problem? The problem is content type. If you use for the internet commands, what happens is that you have to decide whether the content type is HTML or plain. You see, the plugin adds a header that says this is multi-part, this is text plain or text HTML. You know, oftentimes what happens is that the client, you can send two versions of an email in one go. It has a plain text version, which is good for a device with limited screen real estate, but perhaps you would want to have the richer rendering on a desktop computer, for example. And what is possible with the MIME is that you can have an email containing two representations of the same message, one in plain text, one in HTML. Now, some servers do this automatically. So you send an HTML email, the server parses the content, and then tries to extract a plain or the text information from the HTML, and then automatically adds a plain text version to the content, and then it's actually sent to the client. But then that's all programmatic, it's automated, so the message you don't have it, full control over how the plain text version is going to appear on the other end. And another thing is to do with how you attach images. If you use for the internet commands, the plugin will handle it automatically, but what it does is it uses a content type called multi-part mixed, and that's slightly different to multi-part related. And here's an example. Actually, this is a screen capture from my email example, the first method in the sample database, which is that typically on an Apple client, you see the HTML, you have the image nicely embedded in the message, but you also get the embedded image as a separate attachment following the HTML. So you see two copies of the same image. Well, you don't really want the image at the end because it's already embedded in the text. That you can, to tell the client that this image is actually inside the main message, you have to use multi-part related, but for the internet commands uses a different convention, and that's how it's rendered differently. So two problems, and I can show you how this can be solved if you construct your MIME manually. So that's the previous one. I use for the internet commands, and this is what I get. There's no way around it. Next, method 2. Method 2 and method 3 are actually the same thing. Method 2 stops at the point it constructs the MIME. Method 3 actually sends the message. I'm not using any plugins other than for the internet commands. All this MIME methods that you can find in the MIME folder is plain for the code, just string manipulation, because at the end of the day, MIME is just a way of concatenating processing string. But I have a high-level function, and here, like I mentioned earlier, I'm explicitly telling the method function that I want to use multi-part related. By the end of the method, the final product is printed, exported to the desktop, so let's run it. And this is what I get. I don't have the extra image because if I care to go inside the source, it's too small. I know I can make, oh, maybe I can't make it larger, but I'm using the other content type. So let's actually send this. And like I said before, sending raw MIME is only possible using the QuickSend command, which is what I do in method 3. So here it's the same thing as the previous method. It's just that I'm actually sending it using the QuickSend command. Send. Did it work? Yes. And I should get the message in my client. There it goes. Without the extra image at the end, because because I manually constructed a MIME. How would I process the template as in? Okay, sure. So the question was, how would I process the template, the HTML actually? So it's really the same thing right up to, well, actually it's not the same thing. I forgot what I did in the method, but really I'm just passing the HTML a static HTML here. But I could have done the same thing with process HTML tags. The construction of MIME and the construction of the HTML are two separate tasks. The MIME methods with the prefix only deal with the MIME part. You can use. That's what, yes. So I could have replaced this with, but just to keep things simple and focus on the MIME part, I think I decided not to use that in this particular example. But you're right. You could use process 40 tags for that. And by the way, in the sample database, I didn't want, well, my email password and usernames are like this, referenced via constants, custom constants. You can create them in 4D inside the resources folder, but in the copy that you have in your USB, the information is obviously removed, but you can put your or your client's credentials to test the sample database. Okay. So that was the demonstration. So here's the summary. If you let 4D internet commands handle the construction of MIME automatically, it works. The only thing is that you can only send a plain or HTML version, but not both. If you care to manually construct a MIME, then it gives you more options. You can send an email with plain and HTML contents in a mixed alternative, so that's the difference. Mixed means that your email has HTML and images mixed, but you don't have the plain text. Alternative means that the client can switch from the text version to the HTML version following the user's requests. And if you care to use multi-part related in the HTML portion, because you can have hierarchy of content types in a MIME, you have better control over how the attachments are processed by the email client, assuming that it recognizes type of email content type. Something else that is possible if you construct the MIME manually is to use a different technology to send emails. For example, there's the popular email client command line application, CURL, with which you can actually send emails through SSL, and it supports all sorts of complicated stuff. But the thing is, this command expects your email message as MIME. So what you do is you use the SMTP protocol to tell the application that what you want to do is you want to send an email. It's not a download, it's not an upload, you want to send an email. You can specify the recipients and everything else. And the important argument is upload file. So the MIME could be a file on disk, or if you're using, for example, the 4D command launch external process, that the MIME is coming through standard input. Whichever way, you have to have the MIME. You can't just simply give an HTML and say, send it. No, that doesn't work. So if you construct the MIME manually, that's something else you can do. OAuth. So what is OAuth? It's a technology for authorization. So auth could infer authentication or authorization. In this context, we're talking about authorization. In other words, the user who has a Gmail, Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft account authorizes the application to do something on their behalf. In this case, to send an email in delegation. Now, OAuth was introduced sometime in the past by Gmail, but back then they decided to use a convention known as OAuth 1.0a. It's a very complicated procedure, and as you can kind of deduct, it was superseded by OAuth 2.0. Now, there's no real difference in the security level if you compare 1 versus 0, which is why some other companies like Twitter continue to use 1. 1 is just, it requires a lot of computation on the client side, and it can be messy. OAuth 2 purports to provide the same level of security, but it's much simpler. And now, Gmail only supports 2.0. So I actually did a presentation about OAuth at the summit back in 2012, but then, 20-something, but then, because it worked back then, so it can't be 2012, but then Google basically deprecated that, and now it doesn't work anymore. So in this session, I've updated the sample code to support OAuth 2.0. And because this is a specification, you can reuse this code. Sometimes you might have to do some adaptation, but still, the major part of the code for different purposes, for example, connecting to Facebook or Microsoft or whatever, they all use the same specification. So some companies might decide to use a different flavor, but still, the chunk of the code works. So here's how it works. First, your application connects to Google by sending an HTTP request. And then what happens is that the end user, through a web browser, is given the option whether to grant or revoke access for that application to do something on their behalf. So at this point, a browser is involved. And because the user is already logged in, or they are forced to log in at this point to Google, the application doesn't have to save the username or the password of that user. That information is still under the control of the user. The application just doesn't have to know. And let's say the user does grant access for the application to do that on their behalf, then they're given what is called an authorization code. You tell that to 4D, then 4D can use that code to do whatever it wants to do, like send an email by doing an HTTP post to what is called an authorization endpoint. So it's a different URL, but it's still Google. What happens is that the server will then return 2 tokens. One is called an access token, which lets your application, 4D application, to actually access whatever services, Google, Mail, Calendar, Drive, offered by the service provider. It's also giving what is called a refresh token. So there is a timeout, typically 1 hour, on the access token. And when it expires, then automatically that access token is now invalidated. Or the user, at any time, even prior to the timeout, can revoke that access token. Well, actually, they can revoke the authorization code. The access token basically expires after a period of time. Then what the application needs to do is then use the refresh token, the other token, to get a new access token with another hour. And let's say the access token expires, then like I said, you can access the service again and get a new access token. Now, the authorization code, so that's the first piece of information sent by the services, can be revoked by the user at any time. And if this happens, the 4D application can no longer access Gmail, in this example, to do something on the user's behalf. And this is where the technology is different to the traditional SSL. The user is not going to change their password or anything. They just revoke access. So the password is still valid for them and any other applications to which they've granted access. But for this particular application, that code is no longer valid. And when that happens, you start all over again from the beginning. You open a browser, you ask the user to grant access, and then it's the same thing. So I'm going to do the exact of what I've explained here live. So here's the first step. Again, all the confidential information are externalized using 4D custom constants. So in the xlib file, they're all removed, but anyway, I first construct the URL and then open the browser using the open URL command. So here's the browser. I'm not logged into Google, so that's what I do first. I'm going to log in. And what happens is that Google says, this particular application wants to do something for you. Are you going to deny? Are you going to allow? Press allow. And then Google gives me the code. I copy this. And the last line of this method is get text from pasteboard, and it's saved in an inter-process variable. On to the second step. Now, I use that code and construct another URL, but actually the body of what I'm going to post to the URL, and I'm going to use the HTTP request command. So now I've got the code. What I need is the tokens. I send a request, and in reply, Google has given me the access token, which is valid for the next hour, and also a refresh token, which I'll use after that token has expired. And the token type is not important, it's just a bearer. And now that I've got the two tokens, I use the same component, well, it's not even a component, it's the same methods to construct my MIME, so that part's already explained, and I post that MIME using OAuth. So again, it's an HTTP request. You post the email to a particular endpoint, a URL, and you tell Google that I have the authorization of the user to do this. And in return, I get what is called a thread ID, which is not really important in this session. But basically, I was able, so that's my previous one from, oh, there's the second one, so very quick. And now you can see that I've been able to send an email through OAuth using 4D internet commands, but the critical piece of the puzzle is that I use QuickSend command because it allows me to construct my MIME manually. Without it, this would have been much more complicated. Again, no plugins other than the internet commands plugin was involved. Everything was just string manipulation. In summary, all the major security features are supported by both the send command and the QuickSend command. When we talk about MIME, QuickSend gives you full control, which means that this is the only way you could have sent an email like Gmail through OAuth version 2, or 1 for that matter. So, conclusion. I hope this session has convinced you to rethink about these two commands, that actually, maybe, especially since v15, QuickSend is the more powerful command. It gives you total control. At this point, I'm happy to take any questions related to this. Oh, yes, please. Right. The question was, can you do more than this example, which is just a simple HTML with an embedded image using the technology, the method used to construct the MIME? The answer is yes. For simplicity, I've only done the most basic thing, which is to tell that the content is HTML, the body is HTML, and added just one attachment. But for example, which is actually done in this part. MIME add part, so it doesn't even say attachment. For this particular example, I'm adding a part as an image PNG, but it could have been anything else. It could have been a zip archive of something you want to send. It could be anything, so you can have multiple attachments, some of which are embedded in the HTML, some of which are just other stuff. So I hope that answers the question. Anything else? Okay. Well then, that's the end of my session. Please, if you can take time to evaluate the session, that would be greatly appreciated. And I'll be happy to take any questions after the session. Just find me in the hotel and then be more than happy to answer. Oh, there's another question. I'm sorry. Oh, the MIME commands, of course. So, in your USB, I wasn't involved in the actual copying of the USB, but I assume that there is a sample database called email for eBase. It contains several project methods like this, which are nicely prefixed, but still, you can go to the Home tab and find all the methods used to construct the MIME procedurally. That's all there is, MIME. And the MIME, some of the commands use other modules like base64 and everything, and also this one actually, ASCII. But yes, so what you could do is just copy these 3 folders, or maybe the utilities might be necessary as well. So everything except the OAuth and the method methods to your database, and you should be able to create MIME in your database too. It's no plugins, just pure 4D code. So that's the end of my session. Thank you.